Brecht's Concept of Gestus and the American Performance Tradition by Karl Weber. Whenever Brecht's theory and practice of the epic theater are discussed, the focus is mainly on the concept of epic theater, on alienation, estrangement, distancing, whatever term is preferred, and the discussion yields vastly different opinions and often rather imaginative interpretations of what Brecht supposedly did, or intended as a theorist and practitioner of the theater. There is, of course, the other term coined by Brecht, Gestus. However, it seemed to invite less attention and explication by Brecht scholars. It is certainly not very familiar to actors and directors in the American theater. I would like to talk about Brecht's concept of gestus and formative influence American performance traditions had on it. The term gestus appeared first in Brecht's writings in a theater review he wrote in 1920 for a local Augsburg newspaper. He used it then merely to signify body gesture as opposed to spoken word. It was not until 1929, 10 plays and several productions he directed later, that Brecht began to use gestus and gestik as in the sense which made the concept one of the pillars of his paradigm for the new theater, epic theater. Eventually, gestus became to be understood by Brecht. As far as the actor is concerned, there are other applications of the concept, but of all physical behavior the actor displays when showing us the character on stage by way of his or her social interactions. It is an ensemble of the body and its movements and gestures, the face and its mimetic expressions, the voice and its sounds and inflections, speech with its patterns and rhythms, costume, makeup, props, and whatever else the actor employs to achieve the complete image of the role he/she is performing. It was important to Brecht that such gestus was memorable for an audience and, consequently, quotable. Equally important was that gestus defined a social position, the character's status and function in a society, and that it yielded an image of a socially conditioned behavior that, in turn, conditions the functioning of society. Though he emphasized the social relevance of gestus, Brecht was always aware of the other agents that condition it. Walter Benjamin explained in an essay on Brecht's epic theater in 1939 why quotability is an essential property of gestus, in Brecht's understanding of it. As a particular sentence or paragraph can be quoted to point out the thrust or message of a text, a particular gestural detail of an actor's performance should be quotable, demonstrating the social gestus of his performance, of the scene, or even the play. In context, Benjamin uses an example derived from the frozen frame in cinematography, when the action is arrested at a moment of a particular gesture. For instance, a mother raising an object in order to hurl it at her daughter, while the father is opening the window to call for help. At this instant, a stranger appears at the door. Tableau, as they used to say around 1900. This means the stranger is confronted with the family's situation. A movement frozen in this manner would establish a quotable gestus that invites speculation, provokes critical thinking, and may result in a specific conclusion, which then would activate the spectator as to forming an attitude or opinion, and thus influence his future behavior versus society. If we try to isolate sources from which Brecht derives specific ideas concerning gestus like quotability, we certainly must consider his practice as a playwright and director, specifically during the 1920s at various theaters in Munich and Berlin, where he had the opportunity to observe many of the great German actors of his time in rehearsal and performance. There was also his fascination with spectator sports, like boxing and bicycle racing, and the new audience he discovered there. During the latter years of the decade, insights he gained from his studies of Marxist theory had their impact on his theatrical concepts. All these experiences are evident in his evolution of the concept of gestus. Several performers were specifically cited by Brecht in the context of gestus. One of these was Karl Valentin, the popular Munich comedian, whose influence on the young Brecht had become almost proverbial by now. Peter Lorre was among them. The Viennese actor Brecht hired for a small part in the Threepenny Opera, and soon after, cast as Gaily Gay in his own production of Man is Man. There was Carola Neher, for whom he wrote Polly in the Threepenny Opera, Sister Lillian in Happy End, and Joanna d'Arc in St. Joan of the Stockyards, or Helene Weigel, his second wife, who was his widow Begbig in Man is Man, The Fly in Happy End, and Pelega Vlasova in The Mother. However, one performer to whom Brecht devoted several essays and whom he mentioned more frequently than any of his German protagonists before 1930 the year his concept of Gestus had become more or less definitive, was the British-American silent movie star Charlie Chaplin. His films The Face, On the Barroom Floor, and Gold Rush seem to have impressed Brecht more than any other movie during the 1920s except Einstein's Potemkin. Chaplin's character, the Little Tramp, seems to have been the first complete achievement of Gestus that Brecht observed. In 1926, he wrote about Chaplin. This artist is a document that is effective with the power of historical events. As early as 1920, he had described the Little Tramp's face. Chaplin's face always is motionless, as if it were made of wax. One single mimetic flicker rips it open, quite simply, with power and with effort. A pale clown's face with a thick mustache, the curls of an artist, the trick of a clown. This sounds like a perfect illustration of Brecht's later postulate that the actor's face should be an empty face written on the body's gestus. In 1929, Brecht wrote in an essay about a modern type of actress. The type represented by Duss or Bernhardt, for instance, has been made obsolete by far, so far, most recent type of actress, the girl type. This girl type represents a substantial advance. It was more classical, so to speak, and showed instead of a mannered expression, no expression at all. If you consider the expression of Lillian Gish, for example, not quite as an expression, but rather as an accidental side effect of a pretty and weak personality, that has nothing to do with the real expression of the beggar girl at Pont des Arts, for example. Again, the face appears here without any expression. A page to be written on. 3 more quotes may serve as evidence for how much Brecht's thinking about epic theater and gestic acting was influenced by the art of Chaplin and American silent movies. In 1931, commenting on his own production of Man is Man, Brecht noted, "The spectator is asked to assume an attitude which equals the comparable way a reader turns the pages of a book. The actor of the epic theater needs an artistic economy totally different from that of the dramatic actor. In a way, the actor Chaplin would serve the demands of the epic theater better than those of the dramatic theater." One reason for this conclusion was given in Brecht's notes on the Threepenny Trial. The great American humoresques, Brecht's term for slapstick comedies, present man as an object and would appeal to an audience of behaviorists. Brecht seems to anticipate here the concept of the children of the scientific age, the audience he wanted to address with his theater in his later years. In 1936, he emphasized, "The epic mode of acting owes much to the silent film. Elements of it were taken back into the art of acting. Chaplin, the formal clown, didn't have the tradition of the theater and approached the presentation of human behavior in a new way." In the same year, he began an article, Theater for Entertainment or Theater for Instruction, with this statement, "When some years ago there was talk of a modern theater, the theater in Moscow, New York, and Berlin was cited. As he pointed out, there were only 3 capitals of the theater as far as modern art was concerned. The Russian, American, and German theaters were very different, but they were comparable in that they were modern. That is, they introduced the technical and artistic innovations." See Theater for Learning, this volume. In writing this, Brecht didn't just have Chaplin in mind, and other American actors he had watched in movies, but also theater performance that he had seen during his stay in New York from 1935 to 36. He was impressed by Waiting for Lefty, the Clifford Odets play about a cab driver strike, by 2 performances of Green Pastures with an all-black cast, and by Ruben Mamoulian's production of Porgy and Bess. He also responded positively to some living newspaper productions by Joseph Losey. Above all things, however, he seemed to have liked watching gangster movies, which he regarded as the most realistic representations of American life. It probably was the quotability of the performances he saw there that corresponded to Brecht's concept of gestus. The frequent observed habit of young spectators who began to swagger like the actor hero of the film they had just watched when they leave the theater offers an example of the gestus that is being quoted. It used to be the hallmark of movie stars that they possessed or created a quotable personal gestus for their characters, as such actors as Chaplin, Buster Keaton, W.C. Fields, the Marx Brothers, Gary Cooper, Lillian Gish, Mae West, or Greta Garbo, to name only a few, had demonstrated. Of course, what Brecht demanded of a quotable gestus went far beyond the effect of a gunslinger's strut might have on his juvenile fans. It rather had to do with what Charles Laughton expressed when, 10 years later, he told Brecht that he became an actor because people don't know what they are like, but I believe I'm able to show them. Brecht demanded a performance that offered the character's behavior to critical inspection by the audience. Chaplin and other American actors seem to have achieved this to Brecht's satisfaction. After Brecht had settled in Santa Monica in 1941, for more than 6 years of exile, he soon discovered that most of the American theater was a far cry from the vanguard position in modern art he had assigned to it in his 1936 article. Already in 1935, he had expressed his disappointment with the unfortunate production of his play, The Mother, by the New York's Theater Union, and stated that in the 3 performances, only a correct mode of delivery was achieved during the performance, when sentences were spoken as though by a witness in court, talking for the record, and in a case where the gestus can be retained in the spectator's memory. He probably saw such elements of epic acting in Helen Henry's performance as Pelega Vlasova. Henry was an actress with experience in vaudeville. In 1944, Brecht explained in a short treatise, Kleines Privatissimum Fremenen Frenund Max Gorlick, to his American stage director friend. The manner in which Broadway or Hollywood create certain thrills and emotions may be artful, but it serves merely to fight the awful boredom which a perennial repetition of falsehoods and stupidities evoke in every audience. This technique is employed and developed to elicit interest in matters and ideas which are not the audience's interest. Obviously, such a technique was aimed at the opposite of what Gestus was meant to achieve. In American movies, where he once had discovered the first example of gestic acting, he now found mostly naturalism and mediocrity. He observed, for example, while the audiences of the Globe Theatre still shared the experiences of the extraordinary Hamlet, our audiences share merely the extraordinary experiences of Mr. Clark Gable. The American film has not transcended the phase of situation comedy and situation tragedy. The average lover, villain, hero, or mastermind is moved across certain situational fields. And he concluded that the American people who were so proud of their individualism didn't see individualities in their movies, with the exception maybe of Orson Welles' films, where damaged individuals appear. Eventually, he arrived at the opinion that the better traditions of American theater were surviving only in Broadway musicals. Brecht made some determined efforts to write for Broadway, and he was involved in several projects which were aimed at Broadway production. However, only one of them ever made it to Broadway, the Auden/Brecht adaptation of Webster's Duchess of Malfi. When it arrived, Brecht's name had been withdrawn from the credits, and the production, with Elizabeth Bergner in the lead role, closed after 39 performances, ostensibly a flop. In his notes on the hapless venture, Brecht wrote in 1946 that the production, which had been directed by George Rylance from Great Britain in the old-fashioned English style, should have followed the model of a Broadway musical that has been evolved to the true expression of everything that is American. Stage designers and choreographers use V-effects, or alienating effects, to a great degree, the latter ones such effects that have been culled from folklore. The painted backdrops, the most important part of the sets, show the influence of modern painting among other good surrealist concepts. In the dance numbers, which are sometimes intelligently devised pantomimes, the gestic elements of the epic theater appear. Brecht had seen several musicals in New York, among them Oklahoma in 1946. One performance he liked so much that it is the only Broadway production approvingly mentioned in his journal, Thornton Wilder's Our Town, directed by Jed Harris. Brecht called it a progressive production. Wilder's play certainly corresponds in its structure to some ideas imminent in Brecht's paradigm of epic theater. However, when he saw the Glass Menagerie, he noted in his journal that the play was idiotic, yet called Laurette Taylor, who played the mother, a totally modern actress. She plays epic theater. Many years later, when Brecht commented on his own production of The Caucasian Chalk Circle at the Berliner Ensemble, he stated that the play owes much of its structure to the disgust with the commercialized drama of Broadway, yet it also employs certain elements of the older American theater that excelled in burlesque and show. In these imaginative presentations, which remind us of films by the exceptional Chaplin, the audience's intention was not merely focused on the advancement of the plot, except in a much cruder and larger manner than today. It was concerned more with the how. Today, the joy of storytelling is stifled by the fear of achieving no impact. The concluding remark certainly seems to aim also at the prevailing modes of drama in East Germany during the mid-1950s. In 1942, when Brecht told Clifford Odets how much he had liked Waiting for Lefty, he baffled the playwright with the observation, "This little play employed the only form which has a tradition here, namely the form of vaudeville." Brecht's esteem for this American heritage wasn't all too widely shared, as he discovered. But it was children of vaudeville, like Chaplin or the Marx Brothers, who had built and improvised on this tradition, and who had demonstrated to him in their films the potential of Gestus for a new kind of theater. Returned to Germany, where Brecht had his own company, he applied in his directorial work much of what he had seen in American films and, maybe, on New York stages. For him, entertainment was as indispensable to the theater as his concept of Gestus, but both were never ends in themselves. Gestus was subsumed in the encompassing paradigm of epic and, later, dialectic theater, as he renamed and redefined it in his last years. The Gestus of the performer and the Gestus of the performed were meant to interact in a dialectic that reveals their social function, while creating the Gestus of the performance. And the Gestus of the performance was to take sides in the social struggles of our age. Brecht noted in his journal, August 1943, "American actors, when asked why they act, say, to express themselves, to use their creative potential. Qiang, an American Chinese actor Brecht befriended in Hollywood, acts because he loves people and he hates people, thus he recommends or discredits them." It is obvious which of these two answers Brecht preferred. That's all, folks.